Here come the Marines, moving out and moving into action as the war in Afghanistan enters a new phase. An American smart bomb misses its target. 5 U.S. servicemen are wounded. Eye on America, science, ethics, and the law on a collision course over what's said to be the first cloned human embryo. It's official, the recession is here. And with most interest rates so low, why are credit card rates so high?
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
And good evening. Dan is on assignment tonight. I'm John Roberts. The Marines have landed in Afghanistan. After a nearly week-long lull in ground fighting, the past 24 hours has seen a sharp rise in the intensity of the war and a dramatically heightened role for American combat troops. 5 U.S. military personnel were wounded when a bomb from an American jet hit near their position outside the northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif. In the south, hundreds of just-arrived U.S. Marines have begun attacking Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters from a newly established base near Kandahar. We begin our coverage tonight with CBS News correspondent David Martin at the Pentagon. David?
John, U.S. Marines are inside Afghanistan on an operation designed to surround and cut off what is now the last remaining Taliban stronghold. The first wave of Marines came ashore from amphibious ships off the coast of Pakistan. There are about 600 Marines on the ground now, but more are going in.
Now, in short order, you'll have 1,000+ Marines in the backyard of the Taliban within 2 days.
They seized the same desert airstrip Army Rangers raided a month ago. Only this time, the Marines plan to stay.
Their purpose is to establish a forward base of operations.
Marines plan to move closer to Kandahar in an effort to cut off all Taliban trying to escape and all supplies going in.
We now have forces that can more successfully interdict highways and main routes of transportation and communication.
Americans are now in the thick of combat all over Afghanistan. Here in Mazar-e-Sharif, where opposition forces are trying to put down a revolt by Taliban prisoners. One CIA man is missing and feared dead, and this misguided airstrike left 5 U.S. Special Forces soldiers injured. The Pentagon released video of a separate, more successful attack. In slow motion, you can see a rocket-propelled grenade being fired from a building, followed a short time later by an American bomb which destroys the building. For many Taliban, including their leader Mullah Omar, it promises to be a fight to the death.
I can't imagine why he would be freed, or by whom. Nor can I imagine that he'll end up being captured. From everything I've read about him, he's a rather determined, dead-ender type.
U.S. intelligence is now picking up evidence of serious dissension among Taliban leaders over Omar's determination to fight to the bitter end. As one U.S. official put it, the hope is someone in the Taliban will, quote, put a bullet in Omar's head and then tell us where Osama bin Laden is. John?
David Martin tonight from the Pentagon. As David reported, some of this day's fiercest fighting took place near the first Taliban-held city to fall earlier this month, Mazar-e-Sharif. U.S. troops were caught up in the battle to put down a Taliban prisoner revolt. CBS News contributor Dodge Billingsley has an eyewitness account from the heart of that battle.
For the past 24 hours, the United Front and foreign Taliban POWs have been fighting for control of a fortress outside of Mazar-e-Sharif, the headquarters of United Front Commander General Rashid Dostum. When I arrived this morning outside the fortress, it was surprising the intensity of the fight coming from within the fortress. 3 Taliban rockets flew over my head, falling in a field behind me. I arrived to the northeast tower of the fortress as the firefight continued to intensify. The United Front had deployed 2 tanks, one on the tower and another on the grounds below, but were basically fighting from the high ground. The Taliban was holding positions toward the south end of the fortress. I stayed on the northeast tower for a couple of hours through the firefight, but eventually came down over the wall just in time to meet U.S. Special Forces personnel and 10th Mountain Division troops. They had come to call in an airstrike in effort to eliminate Taliban resistance within the fort.
We're going on the building that's in the center of the compound house. There are Taliban inside that. Right now we got the airplanes on that target first, over. Hey, Missile, be advised, they're about ready to drop. Pull back at this time, over.
Hey guys, get out.
Get out.
Heads up, there's shrapnel inbound.
Cut it, please. This is wrong, very wrong.
There were plans to drop at least 3 bombs on the target, but the first bomb hit only 20 meters from the United Front position in the northeast tower, injuring 5 U.S. military personnel and numerous United Front soldiers.
Come on, stop. We've got wounded Americans.
After U.S. personnel collected their wounded, there was a lull in the fighting. At the same time, the United Front began moving troops back into the fortress. However, it looks as though the battle may be over. For the last 2 hours, at least one AC-30 gunship has been laying down fire on the fortress. There are now reports that the fortress has been more or less destroyed. Reporting from Mazar-e-Sharif, Dodge Billingsley, CBS News.
100 miles east of Mazar-e-Sharif, United Front troops tonight control the city of Kunduz. It was captured after a 12-day siege in which thousands of Afghans fighting for the Taliban were allowed to simply walk away. But as CBS's Byron Pitts reports from Kunduz, many Taliban troops from elsewhere weren't so lucky.
These are the images the United Front wanted the world to see. Hugs and handshakes, a thumbs up from a people set free. CBS News was one of the first Western news organizations allowed into Kunduz after the United Front had kept journalists out for hours, claiming, quote, it was for our own safety. But this, say witnesses, was Kunduz at first light. Taliban soldiers executed in the street, their big toes tied together so they could not run. There are reports more than 100 foreign Taliban soldiers were executed, and thousands more escaped to areas south and west of Kunduz. These 4 were tied and taken away. Their whereabouts tonight, unknown. Many here call it payback, revenge for atrocities leveled on civilians and United Front soldiers by the Taliban.
How was it living under the Taliban for more than a year?
They were cruel, said this villager. Men and women beaten. When United Front soldiers were taken prisoner, they were allegedly tossed in holes, hand grenades dumped on their heads. This is downtown Kunduz with the United Front flag flying overhead. People here can taste freedom for the Taliban for the first time in more than a year. This was the last city in northern Afghanistan still controlled by the Taliban. It took 12 straight days of bombings and bloodshed to liberate it. There is clear evidence U.S. warplanes hit many of their targets with deadly precision. And there is evidence, too, of lives returning to normal.
Who is that?
My daughter.
Your son and your daughter?
Yeah.
This man is a CBS News interpreter, reunited with his wife and 2 children for the first time since the Taliban took Kunduz.
Now I'm very happy to see them. It is a chance.
A chance?
Yeah.
A chance to start a new life for some, and a chance to settle old scores for others. Byron Pitts, CBS News, Kunduz.
For U.S. war planners, defeating the Taliban on the battlefield is merely a necessary first step toward finding and eliminating terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden and his followers. Many believe bin Laden is holed up in a fortified cave, like the Tora Bora complex southwest of Jalalabad. If so, those hunting him face a daunting task, as CBS's Wyatt Andrews reports.
The Taliban's leaders and Osama bin Laden are believed to be somewhere out there, hiding in mountain bunkers burrowed thousands of feet into the granite.
One of our objectives is to smoke them out and get them running and bring them to justice.
But that is a complex mission. Experts think bin Laden is hiding not in some cold cave, but in one of several bomb-proof fortresses he spent years preparing.
B-52s aren't going to do it.
Jack Schroeder, an expert in Afghan caves, describes these bunkers as multi-level complexes, complete with electric power and running water.
That has zigzag tunnels. It has rooms off. You probably have a sleeping room. You have a munitions room. You have a food stores room. Certainly the caves that have been built by them are hardened, tough caves.
During the Soviet occupation, a CBS camera team documented this kind of work. Where the naked eye sees a sheer cliff, there's a hidden cave blasted out of rock. In this cave, wheelbarrows of stone were coming out, truckloads of munitions were going in. Back then, as the Afghans held off the Soviets, this young soldier, Igor Lysenenko, fought at a cave complex near Kandahar. It's in an area where the U.S. thinks bin Laden might be now.
Very complicated systems inside the mountains.
The Afghans, he warns, won't just sit in bunkers. They will move within the Karez, an ancient irrigation system now used as an intricate network of tunnels.
It's impossible to fight against people inside caves by ordinary weapons. It's absolutely impossible.
And this is the enemy the president has vowed to smoke out, an enemy now occupying underground territory that's never been conquered by an outside power. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Washington.
Even as the fighting and the hunt for bin Laden go on, Afghanistan's various factions and ethnic groups are beginning to discuss the country's post-Taliban future. Afghan delegations are arriving in Bonn, Germany for the start tomorrow of UN-sponsored talks on forming a new government. Those talks could last for up to 2 weeks. President Bush said today Afghanistan is just the beginning of the U.S.-led war on terrorism. And while U.S. officials have offered no evidence directly linking Iraq to the September 11th attacks, Bill Plant reports tonight Mr. Bush made it clear Saddam Hussein is at the top of his terror watch list.
The president warned that Iraq could be a potential target in the war on terrorism if it produces weapons of mass destruction. And today, Mr. Bush demanded that Iraq's leader allow the return of UN inspection teams.
As for Mr. Saddam Hussein, he needs to let inspectors back in his country to show us that he is not developing weapons of mass destruction.
In his September speech to Congress, the president never mentioned weapons of mass destruction as a form of terrorism to be dealt with. But today, in a shift of emphasis, he linked them to Iraq.
If you harbor a terrorist, you're a terrorist. If you feed a terrorist, you're a terrorist. If you develop weapons of mass destruction that you want to terrorize the world, you'll be held accountable.
The change in tone follows intense pressure from conservatives to use this war to finish off Saddam Hussein. An outside policy group of defense experts close to the White House sent the president a letter saying that not to target Saddam Hussein could mean an early and perhaps decisive surrender in the war on international terrorism. But a former official of the National Security Council says taking on both terrorism and weapons of mass destruction could fracture the alliance.
But if we say that this is the same problem as the problem of terrorism, we're going to run the risk of countries saying the United States is trying to accomplish too much and too many different things here, and we can't support them in that.
The president says that he hasn't refined his idea of which countries the war on terrorism will eventually target. But what he may have done today is signal the hawks who want to take on Saddam Hussein that he's listening. John?
Bill Plant reporting tonight from the White House. Attorney General John Ashcroft said today there is no way to know for sure if there is a genuine terror threat against U.S. natural gas pipelines. But he said the oil and gas industry is taking the possibility seriously. The Attorney General said the FBI heard of such a threat about 2 weeks ago, but there was no confirmation and no specific target. Next up on the CBS Evening News, Eye on America, debate over human embryo cloning divides and multiplies. And later, before you max out those credit cards, there's something you should know. Tonight's Eye on America focuses on the growing ethical and medical debate about human cloning. A U.S. company says it produced the first cloned human embryos, only a few cells that didn't live very long. Still, as CBS News medical correspondent Elizabeth Caledon reports, the announcement has spawned a full-fledged battle for and against such research.
Scientists at the small biotech company Advanced Cell Technology are calling it a partial success. Preliminary data, baby steps.
We saw evidence for the first time that human DNA could be reprogrammed by cloning.
But their announcement made at the end of a sleepy holiday weekend was a wake-up call. Cloning technology made famous, or infamous, by Dolly the sheep is being used on human embryos. The main purpose of the research, according to company president Michael West, is to develop embryos as a source of stem cells, those versatile young cells many scientists believe may one day cure some diseases.
We're advocating the use of cloning in medicine. We call that therapeutic cloning, as opposed to the use of cloning to make a human being.
Stem cells taken from cloned embryos would have a big advantage. They would be less likely to be rejected by the recipient, since theoretically they would be made of a person's matching genetic material. But in the advanced cell technology experiments, no stem cells were gathered from the cloned embryos because they all died after dividing just a few times. Many scientists are calling the test a failure.
This, to me, is not a successful outcome to obtain cloned human embryos.
Gearhart, a leading stem cell scientist, is concerned that a rush to publish premature results will fuel a crackdown on research from a government already skittish about stem cell science. Indeed, President Bush diverted his attention from a raging war abroad to condemn the advance at home.
The use of embryos to clone is wrong.
And politicians are now calling for a 6-month moratorium on all forms of cloning. Some have proposed a ban.
I think it's very dangerous. You are creating people. You're creating humans.
Advanced Cell Technology insists it's cloning for a cause and has the luxury of proceeding with private funding. The question remains, will their baby steps add up to a great leap for medicine or a leap of faith for medical ethics? In New York, I'm Elizabeth Caledon for Eye on America.
Almost half of the students at a New Bedford, Massachusetts high school stayed home today, despite police assurances that they would be safe. This came as a 17-year-old student pleaded not guilty to charges of plotting to attack the school. He and two 15-year-olds were allegedly planning to set off bombs inside the building, shoot fleeing students, and then kill themselves. Up next, the Market Watch. Many lenders are practically giving money away, but credit card interest is still in double digits.
Tonight's Market Watch segment is sponsored by the Travel Industry Association of America.
The research group that determines such things reported today that the record U.S. economic expansion ended in March, 10 years after it began and the economy entered a recession. This is based on a variety of economic data, including output. Wall Street extended its rally today. The Dow gained a little more than 23 points, the Nasdaq just over 38. They're still counting receipts from the first weekend of holiday shopping, but online sales at least appear to be better than expected. If you're charging your purchases, Anthony Mason has news of interest for you on the Market Watch.
10 times this year, Alan Greenspan has lowered interest rates. Mortgage rates are at 30-year lows, and auto companies are offering 0% financing. But have you looked at the rates on your credit cards lately?
They should be lower. I mean, they keep dropping it down. They should be really low.
But the average interest rate on credit cards is still nearly 14.5%.
And maybe they could increase some spending on the credit card if the interest rates weren't so high.
Why so high? Check that small print. Many cards have floors, rates they won't go below.
Many cards have literally bottomed out. Some of the widest held cards in the country stopped declining about 2 or 3 rate cuts ago.
But Robert McKinley of cardweb.com says rates have dropped more than 2% so far this year.
Actually, credit card rates this year have come down to the lowest level in their entire history.
And those rate cuts have saved consumers about $11 billion in card payments. But lower interest rates have saved the card issuers an estimated $19 billion.
The industry's profits are way up because their cost of money is way down.
MBNA, the largest card issuer, saw profits soar 33% in the second quarter.
It's disgraceful, really, because Alan Greenspan wants the economy to get going. He wants to help consumers. The credit card companies are pocketing the money and getting rich.
The Fed has made sure there's plenty of cheap money to be had in this struggling economy, but Alan Greenspan can't help you with your credit card bill. Anthony Mason, CBS News, New York.
On the CBS Weather Watch tonight, a high plains drifter. They were praying for snow in Colorado ski country, but when the storm finally came, it didn't stop there. It blew out of the Rockies and into the northern and central plains today, making roads slippery and some children on sleds very happy. While it produced wind-driven snow up north, the storm made a big splash with heavy rain to the south as it headed on into the northeast. There have been many flags of honor since the September 11th attack on America. This one is unique. No one really knows how this 12 by 18-foot nylon flag turned into a spontaneous message board. It flew near the World Trade Center ruins, and when it was taken to a nearby command post, the writing began. Expressions of grief, expressions of gratitude. The stars were filled with names of the victims. Now that it's filled with messages, there is a plan to present it to the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit as an emblem of honor for those who fight in Afghanistan. And that's the CBS Evening News for this Monday. For Dan Rather, who's on assignment, I'm John Roberts, CBS News in New York. Thanks for joining us. Have a good night.
For news 24 hours a day, CBS.com on the internet and on our interactive partner, America Online, at keyword CBS News.
What the new Patriot Act means for your civil liberties. Tomorrow, experience CBS News.